About 2 years ago, I reviewed the original Jonsbo C6. It stood out with its solid construction, compact cube design, and sleek aesthetic, chamfered corners, inset mesh panels, the whole minimalist package. But while it looked great on the outside, the restrictive mesh and awkward internal layout led to disappointing thermal performance. Now, Jonsbo is back with the C6 Max. It's got a slightly larger footprint and a reworked internal layout, so the question is, does it finally unlock the full potential of this design? Let's find out. Hey guys, CJ with Elevated Systems. Back when I reviewed the original Jonsbo C6, I approached it with the mindset that most people buying a $36 case were likely on a tight budget and probably planning a modest low-cost entry-level build, so the high-end low-profile coolers and SFX power supplies needed to coax decent thermal performance out of this case likely weren't part of the plan. But now, for those working with a slightly bigger budget, along comes the slightly larger and slightly more expensive C6 Max. Jonsbo kept the overall look and functionality of the original C6, but the extended footprint aims to correct some of the layout issues that held the first version back. Did they go far enough? Well, that's what we'll be exploring today. Just like with the original C6, we're going to dive deep into the C6 Max, starting with the specs, then breaking down the features and build quality. I'll be installing my standard test system to evaluate the actual building experience and see how it performs thermally. And as always, I'll wrap things up with my build notes and help you decide whether the C6 Max is a good value for your next Micro-ATX build. The C6 Max measures 349 millimeters long, 202 millimeters wide, and 295 millimeters tall. It supports either mini ITX or Micro-ATX motherboards, CPU tower coolers up to 170 millimeters tall, graphics cards up to 335 millimeters long, and power supplies up to 220 millimeters in length. However, GPU and PSU clearances are interdependent, and I'll get into the specifics of that in the build section. Like the original C6, the C6 Max doesn't come with any fans, but it does support two 120 millimeter fans on the bottom, one 120 millimeter fan at the rear, and either a single 120 or 140 millimeter fan up top. You could fit a 120 millimeter AIO up top, but a 240 millimeter radiator is a no-go. The top fan rails can also be used to mount either 3.5-inch hard drives or 2.5-inch SSDs. These rails can be repositioned to the front of the case for an additional 2.5-inch SSD, but only if you're using an SFX power supply. There's also a mounting point for a single 3.5 or 2.5-inch drive on the bottom of the case. Front I/O includes a power button, one 5 gigabit type A port, a 3.5 millimeter headset jack, and a 5 gigabit type C port. There's no 10 gigabit USB-C here. Around the back of the case includes 4 bridged PCIe expansion slots with individual replaceable covers. The case includes a nylon web Velcro handle that attaches to D-rings on the top of the case. The top, front, and right panels are made from steel mesh, while the left panel features a tempered glass inlay. All the panels are toolless, secured with ball stud fasteners, making removal quick and easy. Just press the release lever at the back and the top panel pops right off. From there, you can reach inside to remove the remaining 3 panels. The panels themselves feel solid, but I do have some concerns about the durability of the glass. It's fairly thin and only loosely clipped into the steel frame, which doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, especially for a system designed for portability. That said, the internal frame is well built, offering a sturdy base for mounting your components. Overall, much like the original C6, the C6 Max build quality punches well above its weight class. Installing my test system, the full specs are listed in the description below, was much simpler than it was with the original C6. I started by adding 2 Arctic P12 slim fans to the bottom for intake, a 3rd slim fan at the rear for exhaust, and a 140 millimeter fan up top for additional exhaust. The Micro-ATX motherboard dropped into place with minimal effort, a big improvement over the weird angle dance required with the original C6. The rearranged internal layout also met my 160 65mm tall air cooler fit with plenty of room to spare. However, not every component played nicely in this enclosure. With my 160mm long ATX power supply installed, my 325mm long graphics card wouldn't fit. And keep in mind, the first PCIe by 16 slot on this motherboard aligns with the second expansion slot of the case. So realistically, if you're using a standard ATX power supply, you're limited to a GPU no longer than 260mm. The solution is an SFX power supply, which is what I ultimately went with. You also notice that the 15mm thick bottom fans just barely cleared the graphics card. If your motherboard's first PCI slot aligns with the top expansion slot, you can use standard 25mm thick fans down there as long as your graphics card isn't any thicker than 2 slots. Beyond that, you'll need to carefully plan your cable management. Just like with the original C6, there's no space behind the motherboard tray, so everything has to be routed cleanly inside the case. The shorter modular cables that came with my SFX PSU definitely helped here. With the PC built and the case buttoned up, it was time to test the thermals. Unfortunately, just like with the C6, the steel mesh panels of the C6 Max are more steel than mesh, combined with the only intake fans being completely blocked by the graphics card, and CPU temps suffer, rising 3.5 degrees inside the case versus the system on an open air test bench. Despite those bottom fans, the GPU temps actually rose 10 degrees during a 30-minute gameplay session. Now, I assume the glass side panel wasn't doing us any favors, and luckily it's easily swapped out with the right panel, so swapping the two, I reran the thermal test, and it actually only helped the CPU out by a single degree, while the GPU temps remained exactly the same. Now, for max airflow but minimal dust mitigation, I flipped the rear exhaust fan so it was an intake. I also flipped the CPU cooler fan, so essentially I had good airflow in the rear through the cooler tower and out the top 140mm fan. I also removed the bottom dust filter. This did bring CPU temps back down to match the open air test bench results, while the GPU temps only dropped by a single degree, which was still 9 degrees above the open air results. On the bright side, because we can fit a full tower cooler in the C6 Max, unlike the C6, we're not even close to thermal throttling. And while I don't like to see GPU temps rise by more than a few degrees inside an enclosure, the max actual GPU temp we hit was just 71 degrees, so about 89% of its thermal limit. All right, folks. Time to wrap up the verdict on the Jonsbo C6 Max. Like the original C6, it still brings that clean, compact aesthetic with the chamfered corners, inset mesh panels, and an almost Minecraft cube-like profile. But this updated version comes with some key changes, both good and not so good. The most notable improvement is the repositioning of the power supply from the side of the case to the front. This opens up vertical clearance for full-size tower air coolers, which significantly improves CPU thermals compared to the original C6. However, that same change limits the maximum GPU length, and unfortunately, GPU cooling still suffers, especially with higher performance cards. The mesh panels remain more style than substance, and airflow restrictions continue to be a limiting factor, especially for graphics cards. I also have to say I'm just not a fan of the tempered glass inset panel. I'm not sure why manufacturers keep including them on cases meant to be portable. A full mesh enclosure would have been perfect here. That said, the C6 Max keeps a small footprint and adds just enough internal volume to make room for slightly higher spec builds. I'd say it's a solid option for something like a Ryzen 7 and RTX 4070 or RX 7800 XT combo, as long as you're mindful of GPU clearance and thermals. I still strongly recommend going with an SFX power supply for the graphics card compatibility and to make cable management easier. And just like before, M.2 storage is the way to go if you want to keep your fan options open. But what do you think of the C6 Max? An improvement over the C6? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this review helpful, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more case reviews and PC builds and tech-focused content, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.